My name is Iqrah. Welcome to my workshop about Intro to iOS Development, Making an App with SwiftUI. Like the title suggests, this workshop is going to be divided into two main bits. The first is Intro to iOS. So we're going to dive deep into the tools used, the commonalities and difference between Swift programming language. And then the next half of the workshop will deal with the good stuff of making an app with SwiftUI. Now all this needs to be done within an hour, so we'll hope for the best, and with the power of editing and pre-recording, we'll be able to achieve this. So let's get going. Now, for iOS development, you mainly need two tools. The first is the operating system itself. You have to be running macOS. Now the version I'm using is Catalina, and the second is the code editor itself. So Apple provides a custom code editor called Xcode. The version I'm using is 11.3.1, but anything from 10 upwards would work. Now, how would you actually get Xcode? So let's say you already have macOS, you have the App Store, so you'll go to the App Store and search for Xcode to be downloaded as any normal app, and then you download it. I'm not really going to go through how to download Xcode, but I will give you a tour. So let's actually start with the Xcode tour. I already have Xcode downloaded, so all I need to do is open it. When you open it, you'll have something similar. This might be blank depending on if you've created projects before or not. I have a few here, and this is the main bit to create new projects. You have the option between a playground and an Xcode project. Playground is basically a sandbox area where you can quickly go and test your lines of code, whereas Xcode project is to create full-fledged apps. So for this half of the workshop, we're going to focus on Playground and then come back to Xcode project for creating the app. So I'm just going to click on Create with Playground. We're going to select blank and then click on Next. We can name our playground whatever we want. I'm just going to keep it as the default. And this is where you navigate to where you want to save it. And then you click Create. I'm just going to put this on the center. Cool. So this comes up when you finally create your playground. Let's actually start with the different options you see on the screen. You have these three buttons over here. So if I click on the first one, this just brings up the file directory. I can close that by it's just a toggle switch. The bottom bar brings up the debugging area, and the right one brings the inspector. Now, I don't have much experience with the inspector, so don't ask me questions about that. Sorry, won't be able to help you. But this would come handy when we're actually creating projects and we have more files to navigate to. And this is the debugging area whenever we want to run the code and see the output. The other two options we have here, one is this. If I hover over it, it says Add Editor on right. So if you keep clicking on this, it'll just add more editors on the right-hand side. And if you want to close it, you just keep pressing the close button. The second option is Adjust Editor option. So if you click on that, you'll have some more options. So you just want to know, so this is the live view side and this is the actual editor itself where you write the code. So if you want this to appear at the bottom, you would say live view on bottom. I want it on my right, so I'm just going to keep it that way. And show editor only would hide the live view section. Other than that, I can't really see anything else that I'd have to explain. So let's actually look at the code now. So import UI kit. We won't be using that, so I'm just going to delete that line. Next line is basically creating a variable and assigning it a value of hello playground. Let me actually change that to hack quarantine, because why not? So this is one way of creating a variable in Swift, and the way you print a statement in Swift is similar to how you do it in Python, where you just say str. So now I want to show the difference between the live view and actually the debugging area. So if I just press this, hit, you see only the print statement gets executed in the debugging area, whereas each line of code, so suppose I had another variable, and if I ran it, each line of code, the output gets added on the live view area. So it helps you keep a track of everything that's being executed, whereas when it finishes compiling, all the print statements or the errors get printed in the debugging area. So that's pretty much it with the playground and the tour of Xcode. You can test out these commands in an online editor. Now, if you like snooping around, you would see that in my desktop, other than the iOS Workshop PowerPoint and this playground that we just created, I have another file called swiftsyntax.playground, which I created in advance. This has all the basic syntax of whatever I thought would be necessary for the first look at Swift as a programming language if you haven't before. Because I think programming languages are similar to human languages because there are tons of options available for you to learn, but you'll only learn and implement the ones that you think make sense to you or you think you're going to use in your life. Similarly, different languages have some commonalities and some differences like grammar, syntax, and that's the case with programming languages as well. So I'm going to assume you have some sort of programming knowledge for this workshop, but maybe you've never programmed in Swift. So I'm just going to go through the basic syntax so it's easier to read when you see a lot of lines of codes at one go. So that's my intention for this first half of the workshop. I'm going to slide this down there and we'll start with the first line of code. It's all very simple, like data types, how to declare variables and constants and functions. So nothing too fancy, but I thought it'd be a good idea to just go through them just in case if anyone's wondering how to write Swift code. It's pretty human readable, similar to, I'd say, Python and JavaScript, but again, it has its own syntax and rules. So the first line of code, it's creating a variable. So similar to JavaScript, you have to write the word var to create a variable, and then you name the variable and then assign it a value. So in this case, it was a string called hello hack quarantine. Now this is one difference. So if you're used to using JavaScript, let and var don't have much difference, but in Swift, let is actually a constant. So to define a constant in Swift, you use the keyword let. So here, let pi is the value of 3.14, which is a double. So variable, constant. There are two ways of declaring a variable. One is you let the compiler decide what type of data type this is, or you can explicitly mention the type you want that variable to be. So in this case, it's an int. And the way you do that is write the keyword, then the name, colon, and the data type, and then assign it. Another cool thing that I haven't really seen in any other language, I could be wrong because obviously I don't know all the programming languages that exist, is the use of underscore. So in this case, the compiler will ignore the underscore, but just to make it more human readable, you have the option of using underscore while creating large integers. So this to us would be 100,000. So if you just run this, and I bring my live code here, this is how it's interpreted. I haven't really used this, but just wanted to let you all know. Coming to Boolean, again, you have Boolean, obviously. Now, string interpolation, hope I'm saying that correctly. Different languages deal with it in different way. This is pretty intuitive. The way you do in Swift is put a backslash and then put your variable inside round brackets. You can also just use some other value, let's say pi, and then run it. It'll come up. So you don't have to typecast it on its own, it'll do it for you, which is what string interpolation is. Next line, array is square brackets, but also dictionary is square brackets as well. But the thing is, for array, you'll just separate each item value with a comma, whereas for a dictionary, you'd have a key and a value. And the way you'd access that value is by having the dictionary name and then mentioning the key, but you also have the option of defining a default value in case the key mentioned doesn't exist. Alright, so Dan doesn't exist in our dictionary, so if I play it, it'll come up as unknown. So I wanted to mention this because some use the actual keyword and. In this programming language, you don't. You use the ampersand sign and these two strokes for or. Coming to switch case, what happens in Swift is it automatically breaks on its own, so you don't have to use break after every case is defined. But if you want it to pass through to the next one, you have to use the word continue. So it's the opposite of how we use switch case in other languages. Also, you need to have a default value, otherwise it would show an error. Next up, for loop. Again, the use of underscore is when you're using a for loop, but the variable used is not being used in the for loop itself. It just saves some sort of memory. It doesn't let you create that variable. You can just get away with using underscore. And this is the range operator, so it's going to go from 1 to 5, and the way you do that is by using 3 dots. But you can also do less than if you don't want to include 5 in it. And two other things, function and structs. So function, I know that some languages use def as the keyword. Here it's func, and then the name. Then you have different parameters. Again, the use of underscore. In this case, the use of underscore is because when you're calling the function, which I'm doing here, you have two options. You can just name the parameter, then you would have to name the parameter and give the value when you're calling the function. Or if you just want to give the value, then you use the parameter name, but before that you use the underscore so that you don't have to call the parameter name and then provide the value. Alright, and this bit is actually defining the return value that you need. So in this case, I'm returning a string. So while defining my function, I have to mention with a dash and an arrow what sort of value type I'm expecting to return. And lastly, structs. So structs and classes are similar. You do have classes, but I didn't mention that because we're not going to use that in our workshop. But structs, I think it stands for structures, are custom data types, complex custom data types. So my struct, which is a hacker, can have multiple properties defined within it. So here it just has one property, but it has a property of hackathon and the hackathon name, and also structures can have functions inside it. So that's that. Cool. So that was just a crash course, a very simple and quick explanation of the difference and commonalities between Swift syntax and other programming languages, just so that when we use the coding language for creating the app, it's intuitive enough. Because I don't know if it's just me, but it confuses me a bit. It takes my brain a little bit time to switch between two languages. So if I'm used to seeing one language for a week, say, and then I'm trying to make a project in a different language, it does take me a while. Okay, having done that, I can actually go back to my slides now. So that concludes the first half of the workshop. Now, before we move on to building the app side of things, I want to take some time to introduce myself. The reason behind that is because even though I'm the one that has decided to give a workshop on iOS development, that by no means makes me an expert. I'm a CS student studying in Manchester Metropolitan University, but none of my university modules teach iOS. So I've been learning this on my own, and I've only started learning iOS development very recently, but I thought it'd be a good idea to give a workshop so that all my beginner knowledge is captured in the form of a video, and if it can help anybody, what more can a person want? But even though I say I'm not an expert, that shouldn't put you off from asking questions. If at any point you feel like there's something that you didn't understand, or you want further explanation, or there's just any sorts of doubts, I cannot promise you that I'll know the answers, but sure, ask away, because we can Google or Stack Overflow it together and find the answers that way. Or feel free to reach out on Discord or this chat, because even though this workshop is pre-recorded, I didn't want to deal with technical issues and my network is down, so I'm recording this a day before the actual workshop slot. I have decided to be online, so I will be on the chat monitoring that and seeing if anyone has any questions. You can always reach out to me on Twitter, that's my Twitter handle. So yeah, just feel free to ask questions, but know that I'm not an expert. And the whole reason why I started learning iOS development on my own is because I've always been interested in coding, but it's just that I don't know which particular technology excites me the most. So I'm just trying to experiment with different technology, and at this given moment, it happens to be iOS development, and I happen to have a MacBook. So I was like, okay, I have the MacBook, might as well just download Xcode and learn and see if I like it or not. So again, very early on in my iOS development stages, so hopefully this workshop will be beneficial. I'm not sure how it's going to go. I love some feedback. Please let me know if I should change anything or if there's anything that you particularly like. So that's that. So that's me. Hi again. And if you forgot my name's Iqrah. Now, because I'm learning this on my own, the next natural question would be, what sort of resources am I using? Now, I'm the sort of person that likes scouting the internet to find as many free resources as possible. In this day and age, there are tons of resources out there, and you sort of get overwhelmed by so many resources. It's a great thing, but also a bad thing because you don't know where to start. But gladly, I went to a meetup in Manchester a few months back, and someone suggested hacking with Swift. So I was like, okay, I'm just going to focus on one resource for now and then see where it goes from there. It's a website created by Paul Hudson. There are tons of free resources. There are some paid ones which I haven't touched on, but I did go to the website. Now, even after going to the website, there were again so many links on the website, I didn't know where to start. But again, I got lucky because while surfing the website, I found something called 100 Days of SwiftUI. There was a challenge going on called 100 Days of SwiftUI. I love challenges, I love coding. I was like, great, I'll mash them together and try this out. So that's what I've been doing. Let me again tell you, I haven't finished 100 days, so it's not even been 100 days since I started iOS development. But that's one of the things that I loved about doing this challenge is because in day 17 itself, I had enough knowledge to create a fully functioning app. A very simple basic app, but a fully functioning app. Now this might not seem that fantastic, especially for a hackathon setting, because I'm a hackathon goer myself, and sometimes within 24 hours you're required to learn a brand new technology and then implement that in your project, and that's that. But mind you, I was only spending 1 hour a day, so technically it was hour 17 of learning a brand new technology and making an app with it. So day 17 and day 18 was when I made my first app, completed it, and then right away, day 19 is when I was asked to create an app on my own, which I thought, because that was my first app that I created on SwiftUI all by myself, that's what we're going to recreate today, and I'll try my best to explain it, and hopefully you all will be able to create it along with me. I will give a quick demo of what the app is. It's very simple, but hopefully I'll be able to explain the core concept so that you're able to understand that knowledge and then use it to create better, amazing things, maybe for this hackathon or upcoming ones or just your personal project. Now, coming to the demo, I'll have to open Xcode again. It's a simple mask conversion app. So I've opened Xcode and you see mask conversion. So I'm going to give a small demo and then we'll actually get on with learning the concepts of creating an app with SwiftUI and then actually building it. Let me reduce the font. That's all the code we'll need. And the way you run a project in an emulator is by pressing Command R. This is going to take some time, so I'm just going to speed this up and probably just jump to when it's being opened up. So that's my app. It has a title called Mask Conversion. It has options to convert from gram, kg, stone, pound, ounce. The user enters a value, so let's say 67, and then you can convert it to whatever output you want. But if it's stone, it'll remain the same. And I've added a set number of decimal values and it also outputs the output unit. So that's what we're going to create. Nothing too fancy, nothing too amazing, but it'll help us understand the core concepts of creating a simple app using SwiftUI. Awesome. So let's get back to my slides. Now this is something that was confusing to me as a beginner. I'm not sure if anyone else has this confusion, but might as well just cover this now. When I was researching about how to start iOS development, I didn't know the difference between Swift and SwiftUI because they sounded very similar, but they are different. Now to create iOS apps, you can use two programming languages. One is Swift, a programming language created by Apple, but also Objective-C. So this is a programming language, this is a framework, also created by Apple, launched last year in their annual conference, WWDC. And I believe Swift was something that was launched back in 2014 by Apple. So programming language, framework. Coming to the SwiftUI app, you would require three things. You would need Xcode as the code editor. You would need Swift as the programming language. and you'll have to import SwiftUI as the framework. Now for a SwiftUI app, I've tried to make a diagram to explain it to the best of my abilities, so I'm hoping it's not too confusing. So this is the diagram that I mocked up. Remember structs that I briefly mentioned in my crash course of Swift syntax? So SwiftUI is a framework that makes use of struct data structure. So when we actually create a SwiftUI app, you'll see that it creates a struct called content view, and it conforms to the view protocol, which is something that the SwiftUI has. So the struct expects one type of view. So that's something that's very important to remember. A struct conforms to the view protocol and expects one type of view to be returned back to it, but that doesn't mean your app can only have one type of view. It's just that it should be enclosed, like all your different views should be enclosed in that one view type. This will make more sense once we actually start coding, but just keep that in mind. And another diagram just to show it in code form. So when you import SwiftUI and you try to make an app with SwiftUI, you get a struct with content view. It conforms to the view protocol. So this ends over here, and all the other types of view are enclosed in just one type of view, so that's returned. And not only can you use the default view types, the default view UIs, but modify it depending on your preference using something called modifiers. Now again, all of this would hopefully make sense once we start coding. So let's get to it. So Xcode time. I'll open Xcode again. And this time, instead of using Playground, we're going to create a new Xcode project. So click that. And this should come up. A little different looking window than when it was Playground. Now you have a couple of options. You can have a cross-platform app or something specific to a particular platform. So macOS, tvOS, watchOS, or iOS, which is iPhones and iPads. So we're going to stick with iOS, and we're just going to stick with single view app and hit next. You need to fill a bit of information. So what should the app be called? For this, I'm naming it HackQ app, even though it's going to be a mass conversion app. It doesn't really matter. Organization name, again, doesn't matter. I just put my name. Organization identifier. I've used my domain that I own. If you own a domain, just put it in the opposite order. This is important. Language. Now, like I mentioned, to create an iOS app, you can do it with Swift or Objective-C. For this workshop, we're using Swift. And user interface should be selected as SwiftUI. As far as I remember, you can only use SwiftUI if your Xcode is 10 or upwards. So just keep that in mind. The rest can be unchecked. Now I hit next. Ask me where I want the app to be saved. I'm happy with it being saved on my desktop, and then I click create. And then this comes up. So this always happens, and it's sometimes very intimidating when a bunch of files come up and you have no idea what they do. So I'm going to try my best to explain them, even though for this particular workshop, there's only one particular Swift file, which is content view.swift we're going to use. But I guess it'll be a good idea just to go through all of them. Just maybe explain it in a sentence, so it helps demystify all these different files that have come up. Also, I'm going to hide a bunch of these things because it's taking too much space. So first up, appdelegate.swift. Because it says the word delegate, I'm guessing it is mainly to delegate or manage things around. I've never really added code here, but I'm guessing it's just managing your app or just putting in some sort of configuration. Next up is scenedelegate.swift. I'm not entirely sure. As far as I remember, it has something to do with launching one window of your app. In iPhones, that is the case. That's always the case. But in iPad, it differs, so you can have more control over it. But again, we won't have to focus on this or like change anything in this file. The third one is content-view.swift, where most of our code is going to go. So remember, content is where our content is going to go. Next is assets. This is where all our media, images, all sorts of assets go. Right now it's empty because we're not going to use any external assets. Fifth file is launchscreen.storyboard. The name itself gives it away. Launch screen is basically a visual editor to help you create a UI for when the app launches. And lastly, info.plist. Again, like the name suggests, it's just a list of information that is probably attached to your app. So if I look closely, it says development language, it specifies that. So any information that we've given while creating the app. I'm guessing plist stands for property list. So those are all the files, but we're going to concentrate on content view.swift. So obviously everything with double slashes you can ignore, or the compiler ignores, because they're comments: who the app belongs to, when it was created, who owns the rights to it, and the name of the app, and just the name of the file. So for the sake of simplicity, I'm just going to delete it because it doesn't really matter. And the first line becomes importing the SwiftUI framework. Next up, like I was mentioning, SwiftUI uses something called struct called content view, and it conforms to the view protocol. And inside the struct, there is a variable called body, which also conforms to the view protocol and expects some sort of view. So this is where it becomes important to only return one type of view back to the body property. In this example, it's returning a view which is a text view, and it says hello world. To actually see what this outputs, you can make use of the live preview or run it in the emulator. If you don't have Catalina running, you won't be able to make use of live view. You just hit on resume and it builds the content preview for you. Let me just touch on the second struct which is available. This is another struct, but is basically a content view preview, which is only available for the debugging stage. But once your app goes into production, this won't have any use. But right now it just contains content view, which is coming from here. So whatever is being built here is just being passed on here. This is how the app looks right now, which is coming from here. But if I remove this, and if I put this here, and instead change this bit, and hit resume, you'll see the preview is coming from this area and not this area. So I'm just gonna go back and change this back. Cool. So hopefully I was able to explain each line of code properly. Again, if you have any doubt, just ask me. Now let me explain the bit where I said only one type of view can be returned back. So we have text view. Now let's say if we want another text to appear, if you put this, it gives an error. That's because it only expects one type of view. But that doesn't mean we can't have two texts in our app. So the fix around that is to use another view and enclose those two inside it. So one of the views that you can enclose it with is maybe a form. So let's say form, and then you have that. And inside form, you can put all sorts of views. But again, let me mention another thing. So you have two text views, one after the other. There's a limitation to that as well. 5 text views, and then if you put another 5 text views, it works. But now, if you put another text view, it wouldn't show up. It says build to fail, because each view can again only take 10 views within it. So to combat that, you would again have to enclose each view into a separate type of view. So this time we could use something like, let's say, section. And I guess we can put all of this inside this and then have 10 sections. Hope that made sense. But ultimately remember, all of this is again enclosed in just one type of view, which is a form. Now, other than form, I want to touch on other types of views that you can use. So I'm just going to delete all this bit. Another 3 types of views that you can have are VStack, which is vertically stacking them together. vertically stacking your views. And mind you, this is just a text view. You can have buttons, images, but if you change V to H, oops, capital H, you'll get it horizontally aligned. And also you have something called Z stack, which is depth. Now the reason why it's not showing up is because it's stacked on top of each other. But suppose I were to increase the exclamation marks, it would then show up. So a Z stack could be helpful to sort of maybe have a background color and then have other types of stack on top of it. Again, there are tons of views available. There are tons of modifiers available as well. Let me touch on modifiers. So the way you would add a modifier. So let's add a background color, right? So the way you would do that is by using a color view. I think it's spelled the American way. Yep, color view. And I think you can just put whichever color you want. So that's turned it into your background color is black. Now the next thing you can do is, it's not showing up because the text itself is black. Now you can use a modifier to change the color of the text. So you use dot, and then I'm hoping it's color, foreground color, and then I'd say maybe yellow. So now it shows up. So again, two types of views. One is the color view and the other is a text view. Both enclosed in a Z stack, and that Z stack is being returned to the struct, this property of the struct. So this is a brief introduction to the SwiftUI app and the different views. There are tons of views available. The best thing to do would be to either go to documentation or Hacking with Swift website. It just depends on what sort of app you want to create and which view you think would be appropriate for your use case. Again, let's go back to my slide and let's do a little bit of brainstorming of what sort of views we'll require for the app that we want to create. Right, so I've created a diagram to help visualize the type of views we might need. So if you remember the demo that I gave, it was an app with a title, then it had some sort of a picker view. It also gave a place for the user to input a value. It would calculate the result and output it. So looking at the diagram, you can already see that we would need 5 types of views for our app. I've also gone ahead and mentioned the exact type of view we might need. So the app title uses something called navigation view with a modifier called navigation bar title. Unit selection uses something called a picker view with a picker style modifier with a segmented picker style. Text is something that we have been using quite a lot, which basically just prints the message out on our app. But if you want the user to enter some sort of text, you would rather use a text field. And the parameter for that is a title and also a variable attached to it so that you can store that value. And it also has a modifier in this case because it's all numerical value and it can have decimal, right? So this is the basic diagram that's going to help us visualize and create our SwiftUI app. I'm not going to create a brand new project, so I'm going to go ahead and modify the existing one. For now, I'll just delete whatever I had and start fresh. So what I'm thinking is, let's start with the easy bits, which is text, because we've already done that. And then maybe we'll move on to the text field and then handle the app title and then come back to the picker value because we've not done that before. Okay, so also I want 2 sorts of sections, right? One for my input section and one for my output section. So let's go ahead and create that. But I do remember that I can't give back 2 types of view back to the body parameter. So I'm just going to enclose that into a form view. And inside that, I'm going to have a section for my input and another section for my output. Again, this is all preference. You can create and design your app the way you want it to. Now inside my section, this is going to have, let's just comment this as my input section. And this is going to be my output section. Now in my output section is where I want the text view to appear with the calculated value. So for now, I'm just going to create a placeholder Whereas in my input section, I would want the user to input the text, so I'm going to use something called a text field. The text field view takes a title, so enter input value, and also a second parameter, which is a variable that will store the text. Now we first have to create that variable, but I think I'm going to name it input value label maybe. Now we need to create that variable. We're going to create it outside of our body parameter by using the keyword var, because it's going to keep changing, is equal to something blank for now. Now even though it's going to be an integer, text field can only take string values. Now one way the structs access protocol works is you have to use the @state keyword and also make it private. So that should solve everything, and I will just hit try again to build my app again and see what it comes up with. So there you go. You have an input text field and an output text. Now I'm also going to go ahead and create my navigation app title. So for that, you need something called a navigation title view. I'm going to actually wrap that outside my form. Navigation view, I think that's what it's called. I'm going to add a modifier to it. Now please remember, if you're adding a modifier for the title, it should be inside and not outside. So my brackets for my navigation view end over there, right? So I'm going to put the modifier inside, which is navigation bar title, and it's going to take a string, which is, I'm going to call it mass conversion. And I'm going to try to build it again. There you go. It shows up. Okay, so now the only thing remaining is actually making the picker value, which we haven't done before. Now before I actually create a picker value, I'm going to go ahead and create an array of the unit values that we want to use. It's going to be a constant, so I'm using the let keyword and calling it unit values, and gonna go ahead and type in all the units that we want to use. I'm also gonna collapse my file directory. So I have my array. I also want to create another variable called unit value index, just so that I can use that in my picker value. Unit index, and this can be assigned literally any number which is one of the index for my array. So now I can go ahead and create my picker view, which is going to go on top of this. So the picker value takes two parameters. One is the title, and the other is a selection, which is going to be my unit index. Now inside my picker value, I'm going to use a for each statement for each view to iterate through each item of my array and print it with the help of a text view, which takes a range. So in this case, it's 0 up till unit values dot count. I'm going to go ahead and print my array values using string interpolation. And there's some error, self. Okay. So we need to put self.unit values. That's all. I hope this would work. So let's go and try rebuilding this app again. And when you do that, you see there's a picker value that appeared. If you click on this, you'll see all our values appear. But I want a segmented style. So it's as simple as adding a modifier to it. This time it's going to be attached to the outer bracket of my picker, and the picker style is segmented picker style. And there you go. So that's done. Now I want the same exact thing for my output unit as well. So I'm just going to copy paste it. So cool. What I also want to do is test out if my output value is working with maybe some sort of another variable and use string interpolation. So I'm going to put this here, and now I'm going to run it in the emulator to see how it works. I just want to see if it's going to work the way we've coded it. So my emulator. So the app has come up. Now I can enter a value, 98.87, and it gets printed out, so that's cool. And I can also change between, oh, so there's a fault in it. Not only do we have to have an index for an input, but we also have to have a separate input attached to our output unit. Okay, that's a good catch. So let's go ahead and fix that. So the way SwiftUI works is it's declarative in nature. So whatever we declare in our code is the driving force between our UI. So just because our input section and output section are attached to the same index, so whenever the user interacts with the user interface and changes the index for one particular unit, it is also dynamically changing the rest of the items attached to the same variable. A fix around this would be not only to have a unit index for input, but also another one for an output. So one is input, one is output. My input section is going to have the input attached to it, and my output section is going to have output attached to it. Cool. So now if we rebuild this, let's see if it works. So this goes on its own, and this has its own. So the only thing left to do is to add logic to our code. Now first things first, I'm going to first create another array and store all the conversion values. Now I'm not going to create a function that calculates each unit value for each custom output value. What I'm going to do is no matter what the user inputs, depending on the input unit it selects, it's going to first convert to one standard unit, and then from there convert it to whichever is selected. So let's create the array for all the conversion rates. So I'm going to create another property called convert to gram, because that's the value I'm going to convert all my input units to. It's going to return a double. We need the input value and the user input, and we're going to use switch case to convert it to the appropriate values. Now I'm not going to make you watch me type all of that, so I'm just going to cut to my completed property. So this is the completed version. What I've created is a constant value for this particular property, which is the input unit and the input value, which is being taken from the array of the selected index, and also a value that's entered by the user. This is for a default value of 0. Then I use a switch case to take the input unit and convert it appropriately. Now once I have the gram value, I can then use that to convert it to the selected index for the output unit. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to name this convert to output unit. And again, this is going to return a double. And this will again use a switch case, but this time instead of using the index of the input unit, it's going to take the output unit. So this is the completed version. Now instead of input unit, I have output unit selected. Gram value is calling the property from here after calculation is done. And then again, I'm using a switch case to convert it to the appropriate selected unit. All that's left to do is use this function to output it in my text field. So I'm going to take this, scroll down, and where my text is, I'm just going to replace that. That's all. Now I'm going to run it in the emulator and see if it works. Cool. Now I'm going to enter a unit. Let's say 78 grams is equal to 0.07 kg. Correct. Cool. So our app works now. Now one thing that we can change is the number of decimal values that it takes. It's an easy fix. In our text field, all we have to do is add a specifier. So specifier is equal to %.5f. That's for 5 decimal points. If you want more than that, go ahead and change it to 6 or 4, up to you. So again, I'm going to run this in my emulator. So you can see there's 4 decimal points now because we put 4f. And that's that. Now our app is fully functioning and we made it under an hour. Now I know if this was live, it wouldn't be possible under an hour because there was a lot of editing done, mostly to edit out dead space of me just typing. Hope you enjoyed this and hope you learned something new. I'm not sure how good I was at explaining the content. I literally designed the content for this workshop in 2 days' time. So I really hope this was helpful for anyone watching. I'm going to switch to my slides one last time and end this workshop by giving you some useful resources that might help you pursue iOS development. So first up, Apple Developer. That's the website link. It's free to sign up and you do need an Apple Developer account to publish your apps to the Apple Store. That does cost money, but just to create an Apple Developer account to go to the forums and post questions, it doesn't cost money, so would highly recommend. Next up, the conference. Other than hackathons, conference is a great way to meet new people, especially from a particular niche that you're trying to explore. For Apple, it's WWDC. It's happening online this year due to the current situation. So again, anyone can sign up and anyone can attend this developer conference. Not just the official Apple developer conference, but there are tons of conferences always happening around the world during different time periods. So just Google it, and I would highly recommend, if you're a student, make use of your status as a student and go to these conferences that usually cost tons of money to go for free, because that's something that you can do as a student. Other than the conference, if you want to dive deeper into the SwiftUI framework itself, go to the documentation, that's the link. I personally like watching videos and learning, so these are the 3 YouTubers I watch for iOS specific content. Paul Hudson, the creator of Hacking with Swift, Sean Allen, and Code with Chris. These are the 3 that come up the most whenever I have any iOS related query. Paul Hudson specifically is the creator of Hacking with Swift, which I've been following. I think I've mentioned this quite a lot of times now in this workshop, but 100 Days of Swift is one of the challenges of making you learn Swift in 100 days. And because SwiftUI was released last year, he was also kind enough to create a 100 Days of SwiftUI challenge, which I've been following. If you're interested, you could also do the same and maybe take part in it and document your days on Twitter using those hashtags. I'm also trying my best to document my progress on a GitHub repo, so that's the link to that. If anyone's interested, go for it. That's my GitHub username, that's my Twitter ID. My DMs are always open, so reach out. But other than that, thank you. Hopefully this was under an hour. Hopefully you all learned something new. Super excited to see what projects you're going to create. Again, reach out, ask questions, and have fun. But also, please stay safe. Wash your hands, keep a distance, and hopefully we all will get through this current situation together. Bye!